Welcome to another edition of Special Report Online. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't been here before, welcome aboard. It's kind of a more relaxed panel discussion. You can weigh in with questions or comments. You can also vote in the polls that are happening over the next 28 minutes. Our panel tonight, Judge Andrew Napolitano, A.B. Stoddard, and Charles Krauthammer. Let's finish this healthcare discussion. I want to talk about a couple other things, but it seems, A.B., that the problems that started, they're not subsiding, and it's not just a few outlets covering them. There's now a lot of coverage of this, and it has permeated pretty much the American consciousness about Obamacare.
Yeah, and I think that's really one of the big problems. Like I said, they were so short-sighted about what problems they could mitigate and prevent and what a political backlash this finding would be, that they'd actually grandfathered so narrowly. Millions of plans would be canceled, and his statement would therefore be untrue, and that it would give people fear among the insured. There would be this new anxiety that maybe there were more surprises down the road. I think now it's one thing to say that, words matter and he's lied and this is a question of credibility. There's no credibility of government left, particularly not for this administration. I think what's really the bigger fear now is what I said before. You look at the economy and the economics of fear and what it means to people if they hear from their neighbor or their hair cutter or the kid's teacher at school that person now has such a high out-of-pocket, such a high deductible, such a sticker shock that that person who hasn't gotten a letter yet thinks they might be safe and with their old plan is fearing what might be to come in March or May or August of 14. There are large companies in this country, Brett. You've spoken with people who work for them. I have. Everyone at this table has, who've been telling me for years, we're just going to do what we can to get everyone to take the stipend, and we got to dump them into the exchanges because we cannot handle the cost of covering them under the new requirements. Right. That's going to come next September and August. That might be good for the exchanges, but it's not going to be good for the economy. So when you look at the economics of fear, I think people are going to stop buying things. I mean, that's a drastic overstatement, maybe, but I think that this it used to be a problem of the uninsured or the self-insured. Now it's actually, I think everyone who's insured is now really scared, and I think that's a serious problem, even if the website gets fixed.
I mean, you have, Charles, these stories. Jim Engel did another one tonight, and he's been doing a great job finding real stories, real people, and he did one tonight about not only canceling policies in the individual market, but also in the high-risk pools. All of the high-risk pools in the nation canceled, all aimed at helping those with pre-existing conditions who found it difficult to get insurance. And one couple, they were very happy with their plan. She had breast cancer, and both had pre-existing conditions. And they are not finding something equal or better. They're actually finding something more expensive, not covering with a higher deductible.
Look, I think there are two elements in that. The first is complete arrogance, and the second is deception. The arrogance of people, and this is sort of the liberal idea, that you can centrally plan 1/6 of the U.S. economy, with thousands of pages of regulations. We're going to include everybody. We're going to redo the world. Instead of, addressing the uninsured, which I think is a moral issue, specifically and narrowly, and doing stuff, you could do it simply with a tax if you want. It wasn't done that way. We're going to use this as a way to redo the American system. So and the Soviets have tried it. It doesn't really work, and that's why you're getting everybody swept up in this. But the second is deception. The deception and the original lie was, we are going to give 30 million uninsured insurance, and it will not cost the government a penny. Well, yes, technically it can be done if you hide the cost by increasing the premium of the insured.
Precisely.
So it's a subsidy, but it was a hidden subsidy, cynically done so they wouldn't have to show above the line that, yes, it is going to cost. Of course it costs. A 9-year-old would know that you can't insure 30 million uninsured and have it cost nothing, but the money is now coming, surreptitiously. That was the plan. You throw people out of their individual insurance. You toss them into a marketplace where they're going to be required to get stuff they don't need. So they will be paying extra, and that extra, which they don't need, will be used to subsidize other people. And that is the heart of it. It was a lie about it not costing. The only way it could be done was to hide the cost by individuals having to pay a surplus, and that's a transfer of wealth that was intended. All of this is not unintended. This was intended, but now it comes true. And the mystery is, didn't they know that one day it would be obvious?
Well,
did they think they could hide this?
There are many people here online who are typing in that, yes, they did know. BC in Springs writes, lame duck or not, President Obama has already done what he wanted to do, forcing the country and many citizens into such dire straits that the government will have to step in. You know, do you buy this thing that this was designed, Judge, to fail, leading to a different system? I think it's a tough stretch to say that it leads to a single payer because, well, you didn't have the votes when you had Democrats in the House and Senate and the administration to get single payer.
I do not think it was designed to fail, but a camel, you've heard this one-liner, is a horse designed by a committee or designed by compromise. I mean, there were so many compromises that went into this. There's no clear ideology. There's no clear math. There's no clear economics in it. There's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So it wouldn't surprise me if the president inwardly rejoices if it fails, if it leads to single payer. But I don't think it was designed to fail. I think it was designed the way it was because they needed to get every single Democratic vote, and the only way to do that was to have a little of this and a little of that. I want to address the lying. The lying, in my opinion, is a very serious issue. In the lifetime of the four of us at this table and most people watching us now, we've had two presidents who've had monumental problems over lying. One was over a third-rate burglary, the other was over an affair. This is over legislation that affects the lives, the fortunes, and the health of every American in the country. And the people it was intended to help the most are the ones who may very well be suffering the most from the lie. That will cause our friends in the media, normally protective of the president, like Jonathan Karl the other day when he was being mocked by Jay Carney, to turn on this president, and his next 4 years in office, his next 3 years in office could be miserable.
Well, the president who had the affair went through an impeachment process.
Yes.
And there are people on here asking the questions about that. This wasn't under oath. It was a campaign promise
Correct.
that he repeated again and again and again.
Correct.
But for the people who were asking that question,
I beg you, please don't overreach. It always rebounds.
No. I'm asking the question.
No, I'm saying, and I would answer by saying, even if in theory this were an impeachable offense, which I don't know, that's a tough call.
Oh, I don't think it's an impeachable offense.
That's what I wanted. The legal guy to
but let's say, even if it were in theory impeachable, we've learned so many lessons here from what happened with Clinton.
Yes, we have.
He was saved by the impeachment because people thought he overreached. I would say it also about the government shutdown. I was advocating, as were a lot of people, if you believe Obamacare is a disaster, as I did and a lot of other people have, then let it play out. The American people are adults. They will see it, and they will rebel. The irony is that today, who's calling for a one-year delay?
The Democrats.
It's not the Republicans.
Right. I would.
And that's letting reality reign. Don't overshoot. When the other guy's committing suicide, get out of the room. Perhaps you can hand him a pistol, but get out of the room.
So how do Republicans, AB, deal with, as Charles saying, playing this thing as it's imploding before everyone's eyes?
Right.
How do they do it? Do they stay out? And I mean, Democrats have been hammering them for trying to kill it all these times with 40 votes in the House. Do they not engage? Do they try to delay it? What do they do?
Well, that's an interesting question, and some of the people who are working at the campaign committees have a theory, which I think is pretty shrewd, which is that the candidates who are running for office on the Republican ticket and the incumbents who are working to stay in their jobs really need to find a way to talk about Obamacare that doesn't say defund or repeal, but really talks about it as a pocketbook issue now that it's real. It used to be the scary thing where they say it's going to, it's going to sink America and will never be the same, to not talk about it in apocalyptic terms, but to talk about it now that it's real in ways that people can understand, not to use insurance company jargon, but to really talk about what people like the couple you just talked about, who were high risk, and this law was supposed to help the high risk people with pre-existing conditions. We're supposed to now really be able to have secure health security, having that taken away for a higher monthly cost out of pocket. That, I think, is the best path politically forward. It's interesting what Charles says about, not overreaching and trying to call for impeachment and everything in the midst of, the temptation to get away from that pocketbook narrative and go for the extreme is so interesting, because I wrote in my column last week, I said, just the Ted Cruz deception to the grassroots, where he snookered them into making robocalls and signing a petition and donating and all this stuff, and saying on the website Republicans in Congress can defund Obamacare if they simply refuse to fund it. All of that was not true, but in the end, it wasn't as dangerous as the president's telling the country, if you have your plan, you'll be able. It's just a different kind of lie, and it's actually, Obama's is much more dangerous to the country and to the economy.
And yet, when Clinton lied under oath, that was a felony. When Obama lies not under oath, there's no legal ramification, because the Supreme Court has made it very clear. Right. The government can prosecute us for lying to the government, but the government may, with legal impunity, there's a political consequence, but with legal impunity, lie to us.
Charles, that's all I was looking for. I just wanted that sentence.
Why do we have an online show? So we can
They're
dilate,
asking good questions.
So we can elaborate and dilate and speak as
but to defend,
like Castro addressing the nation. I think 8 hours would be about the right amount of
to defend Charles. The consequences of the impeachment of Clinton arguably were so odious to the country. Clinton's eye off the ball and 9/11 happening. It's almost inconceivable that even a Republican Congress that loathed him would vote to impeach him.
But it gets back to the politics of this, and you look at the Cuccinelli-McAuliffe race and how narrow that victory was for McAuliffe. But you also look at the Chris Christie race and the message he sent in that acceptance speech, in which he said Washington should listen and look at how I've governed in New Jersey, and this is a path to victory for the GOP, essentially saying, in his many words, I'm running in 2016. Yeah. Getting to your overreach question, I think that's the message that Christie is sending.
And I think that was his announcement of his candidacy right there. And he said something earlier in the week, I think it was in an interview while on the bus, where he was talking about Obama and the lie. And he said, why doesn't Obama just say, I made a mistake? And, people respect leaders who say that. And he's trying to draw, that's the place where you want to draw a contract, because his strong point, the thing he ran on, was leader. That was the tagline in his ads, governor.
Right. Strong Jersey, strong leadership.
And, when John Kennedy admitted to the Bay of Pigs, his numbers shot through the roof. Approval rating. It was a disaster of pretty great proportions. But he admitted it. He said, I'm the one responsible. It wasn't the generals or my advisors. And he got respect for that. For Obama not to, there were a lot of ways around this. But to continue, the contempt with which he says, you folks, you just don't understand the subtleties here. And of course, I assume you knew all the subtleties.
Does he run the risk of losing control of the Senate by obstinately refusing to...
If he does, he will. They will act independently.
Well, the consequences of that are almost unimaginable.
But he'll have to bend. He'll bend. He's not stupid. I think in the end he'll realize that if he stiffs them, and these guys are up for re-election, they will rebel and he'll lose control totally.
But see, Senator Reid so far is protecting him. Mary Landrieu puts this proposal up to have something that if you have insurance you can keep it, and Senator Reid says, yeah, there's not a chance it's getting on the schedule.
Well, the unity that we saw during the shutdown and that we saw when it was just a few website issues is really changing and breaking down, and I don't expect it. Those senators are panicked. What Senator Begich said on the record when he left the spicy meeting is pretty out there. It's pretty honest, and I think it's hard to say that Harry Reid can be the bulwark against, and control the tide of rage from those senators much longer. But I'd beg to differ. I mean, President Obama was reelected a year ago tonight.
Right.
He has lost the entire year to the IRS scandal, the Department of Justice going on a fishing expedition into the communications of the press, Benghazi, Syria, and now the Obamacare implosion. This is the year that he had to do something.
Yeah.
He is looking at a midterm election where the Democrats are going to defend Obamacare for the third election in a row in a shaky recovery at best. In the 6th year of his term, Republicans are going to hold the House. If he loses a couple of Senate seats or even the majority, so what was he going to do in 15 anyway? It's hard to argue that President Obama has a big chance ahead of him in the remainder of his term, when he is a lame duck, with the poisonous atmosphere in this town of rebuilding ties with Republicans or
Democrats.
state Democrats.
Let me tell you about something that's bubbling up under the surface and hasn't been made known yet. It has to do with the Supreme Court. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in her 80s and does have some serious medical issues. And liberals are pressing her to resign now, while the president still has a majority in the Senate, and she could be replaced by a nominee of like mind but half her age. She has said, I have a life term and I intend to serve a life appointment. I intend to serve my full term. If the president loses the Senate and she decides to leave, he will not be able to replace her with a person of like ideology. He will have to replace her with someone more moderate, because he'll need a majority in the Senate to confirm that person. That will have a 40-year effect beyond his presidency.
Yet another person who stiffs Obama.
Yes.
Because, I mean, and I think it's a little bit unseemly. I understand the motives, of course.
Yes, it's unseemly for them to ask her to go. It's reprehensible,
to ask a
but it's
person
happening.
who spent her life on, you're
taser up, Ruth.
You're tottering a a bit. We think you're not going to,
By the way, she is as sharp as she ever was.
She is. I mean, that's the point. I mean, it's incredibly disrespectful. A person active in the court doing wonderful stuff said, well, we'd like somebody half your age. But it is true there'll be a lot of it. If he loses the Senate, you're right. It will not be an automatic liberal vote.
Right.
It'll be a liberal vote, but it won't be as sort of strong and hardline as she is.
I want to turn to Benghazi in a second, but Michael writes in a question. What happens when an American signs up for the super-duper expensive Obamacare health policy, and after a while they stop paying the premium because they can't afford the premium? Does the government pay the premium? Does the insurance company say, don't worry, you'll owe us? Do they get a new cancellation letter and then they have to pay the penalty for not having a policy? Can they go to the emergency room when they need medical treatment? Inquiring minds want to know the unintended consequences of making people pay higher premiums, higher deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance percentages when they cannot afford.
Well, Michael has written a brilliant question. The only part of the answer to that I know is you can always go to an emergency room if it's a true emergency, whether you have coverage or not. But what the government would do to you, I don't know. And what the government would try to do for you, I don't know. These are great questions.
And the greatest irony,
maybe?
I only know, first of all, getting Obamacare questions answered these days is a little tricky.
Tough, yeah.
But I do know, it has been explained to me that there is some way that the insurance companies, at least initially, if they take a bath in certain exchanges, are restored. There's some bailout for insurance companies, at least at the beginning, so that they continue to.
Not for the individual.
Individuals is going to sink like a stone.
Right.
After all, they said, it's only 16 million people who are being affected by the lie. It's only 5% of the population. You're not going to worry about individuals. There is no provision for the individual.
Well, perhaps they continue to cover the individual, but they get subsidized.
Well, exactly.
We bail out the insurance
But
company.
then they would have had a subsidy at the beginning. But you're saying if they go back.
I mean, that's just AIG proportion.
If this hypothetical a question from Michael results in a person who can't afford the higher premium, and then they get taxed by the IRS. Remember, it's a tax now. I'm saying that sarcastically, but that's what the Supreme Court said it was. And they can't afford that.
Right, yeah.
What happens to them?
But look, the whole point, if you speak to Romney about why he instituted his program, I spoke to him about 8 or 9 years ago when he had this in his mind. He said, here's the problem. People without insurance show up in the emergency room.
Yes.
And it turns out to be humane, of course, and you would, of course, do it, but it's the least efficient way, so he wanted to look for a system where you would avoid that And by the money you save, you're able to establish Romney Care. So it would be the greatest of all ironies if you institute Obamacare as a way to prevent the waste of having a person show up in the ER, with a cold, which is what happens, which is incredibly inefficient, and have the result of Obamacare being people who already had insurance,
rushing in,
never showed up in the ER with a cold, ending up in the ER with a cold.
Yeah, I mean, to Michael's point, this is a great question because $46,000 and below individually, they'll get subsidies. But for the people who make above $46,000, which in a city like Washington, D.C., doesn't get you too far in a year, they may have to pay premiums that make the month-to-month pretty tough with everything else, and maybe they can't pay them. I mean, it's a great question, one that we have to find the answer to.
And even if they pay them, then they don't buy other things, and we see another economic effect just after sequestration that's real.
Okay, I've got a solution. You make 80 and you don't have any subsidies. You got a high premium and you lose a lot of money and you end up poor. Well, then you go back and you reapply and now you get a subsidy because you're poor. So that's how it would work in practice. Well, that wasn't a joke. That was serious. This is a way of transferring wealth from the upper middle class who get no subsidies to the lower middle class who aren't poor enough to end up in Medicaid, but need or going to have to need subsidies.
So the 47%, which impaled Romney, will go over 50%
because
if this legislation succeeds in moving people below the poverty level and making them dependent on the government, and they vote.
Part of the plan.
Very dangerous.
However, if you were wealthier and you lose it, you end up on Medicaid, I don't think you'll vote Democratic.
I really don't think that the White House had a fantasy of this kind of a disaster.
But
I just can't imagine.
Anybody in the White House read the 2,700 pages?
But I don't think that they're...
You misunderstand. It's a political disaster. But the geniuses, the economists, and the health... If you heard Ezekiel Emanuel say on Fox News Sunday, this was designed. You had to get people out of the individual insurance market, generally it's people of some means. You put them in the exchanges, they overpay, and you use the subsidy. This was not an accident. What they never understood was how disastrous it will be politically.
Right.
Yeah.
But economically, that's the way they make it work.
It is pretty incredible to try to get 5 to 7 million, 7 million on the upside by March. The amount of money to try to get 7 million people to sign up in these exchanges
would be less expensive if they just paid the premiums for the 7 million out of the federal treasury.
Give them a free shot.
Okay, I want to wrap up with Benghazi. Next week there are going to be closed-door hearings with witnesses on the ground. A lot of people waiting for this, and Congressman Devin Nunes says a different narrative will emerge as a result of these hearings. And I guess there are a lot of questions yet to be answered here, but it seems like this may open up a different door, Judge.
Well, this is a potential nightmare for Hillary Clinton. What difference does it make? I mean, she's going to have to answer to that. We don't know what the State Department's role may have been. We don't know what awful truth they were hiding. We all know what the rumors have been. But these closed-door meetings are essentially depositions under oath of the witnesses, so that when there are the public meetings, the type that we will all watch with bated breath, the congressmen and senators basically know what the answers will be because the witnesses have already said under oath what their answers are going to be. But these are first-time questions, so the questioner does not know what the answer is going to be, and it could very well be devastating to the administration. I commend whatever investigators found these people, because the administration has done its damnedest to keep them from answering.
Sources are telling us that the House leadership is warming to a special independent investigator if next week's answers don't match up with the State Department and the White House narrative, and Nunes at least is suggesting that that's the case.
You know, that's been the case for a while, but it tends to never get off the ground because Chairman Issa has done his best to command this investigation, and there's a feeling that it could be handled by the Congress if things change next week with these revelations, that might change the course. I think what's interesting is what you said earlier, Brett. This is Obamacare sucks up all the oxygen. Each week the news gets worse, and it's becoming this all-consuming debate and story that we haven't experienced something like in a while. I mean, the shutdown is a big story that will end in 3 weeks, and it's sort of the same thing every day.
It has so many legs.
But people are educating themselves about the problems that the administration created when it set up this system, and they're getting, as I said, increasingly anxious, and we're waiting on all this data. And I think that it is damaging for Hillary Clinton, but it's going to be interesting to see just how much the Benghazi story breaks through from the Obamacare fright.
If, after the 60 Minutes piece, and if the narrative coming out of these CIA operatives is dramatically different, and they drop some kind of bombshell in this hearing, and we hear about it, and that's a question too. I mean, it's a classified hearing. But if that's the case, I mean, it seems like it has another round of at least attention.
I think it could then become a bomb with a fuse. I don't think it will overtake the news of Obamacare. But if there's an egregious contradiction, if it turns out the administration from the FBI interviews 2 days, within 2 days of the attack, knew precisely it was not a demonstration, all this other stuff was a concoction, yet another deception or perhaps a lie. If that is true, then I think the Republicans would be very smart to appoint a prosecutor, special prosecutor, let him or her toil for 6 months, gather the evidence, instead of haphazard hearings where one question is often disconnected from a second,
right,
and the witness gets off the hook. All of us have watched all this and just imagine what the next question ought to be that never is answered. Instead, somebody offers a speech. You put it in the hands of what was his name, Lyman in the
Arthur Lyman, or Mike Chertoff type, somebody who knows how to cross-examine.
And you let that simmer for 6 months, prepare the case, and then you show it at a time when we'll have space, air and oxygen to talk about it, either before the midterm election or even after, where you might have the Senate, and that will be, that would be devastating.
Panel, as always, thank you. Another edition of Special Report Online. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had fun. We'll see you next Wednesday night. Control room, a little goodbye.